For decades, the United States has commanded the most powerful military force in human history. In 2025, Washington's defense budget hovers near $900 billion, larger than the next several nations combined. Iran's defense spending, by contrast, sits somewhere between $15 and $23 billion, a fraction so small it barely registers in comparison. America launches aircraft carriers that function as floating cities of firepower. It flies stealth bombers that can strike unseen across continents. It operates a global web of satellites, drones, and precision weapons that can hit targets within meters. Iran builds missiles. Iran builds drones. Iran builds networks of proxy forces embedded across the Middle East. On paper, this is not a fair fight. It is a structural imbalance, a superpower versus a sanctioned regional rival. And yet, after decades of sanctions, covert sabotage, cyber operations, assassinations, proxy wars, and even direct exchanges of fire, the United States has never decisively defeated Iran. Not once. If America can win on the battlefield, why doesn't it? And why is this seemingly simple war so difficult? If the paradox is that America can dominate the battlefield, yet hesitates to ignite the war, the answer lies precisely here. Because defeating Iran was never merely about overwhelming its armed forces. It was about managing the chain reaction unleashed the moment the first strike lands. And that challenge is exponentially harder. Washington's objective would not simply be to win. It would have to secure 4 outcomes, simultaneously. The first, permanently dismantle Iran's nuclear capability, not weaken it, not slow it, eliminate it in a way that prevents a rapid breakout months later. Second, guarantee it cannot regenerate, even if centrifuges lie buried deep underground, even if enriched uranium is dispersed, even if covert facilities surface beyond inspectors' reach. Third, contain regional escalation. Because a strike on Iran would not remain confined within its borders, Hezbollah in Lebanon, militias in Iraq, the Houthis in Yemen, the Strait of Hormuz, through which roughly 1/5 of global oil flows. One flashpoint could ignite the entire region. Fourth, avoid long-term entanglement. No occupation, no power vacuum, no Iraq-style stabilization mission stretching from months into years. Here is the strategic dilemma. A limited air campaign might delay the nuclear timeline, but not end it. A broader offensive might shatter infrastructure, but unleash cascading retaliation. Regime change might remove leadership, but trigger instability more dangerous than the regime itself. Every pathway neutralizes one threat while magnifying another. The United States commands unparalleled destructive force. What it lacks is a guaranteed way to destroy, and simultaneously control the consequences. At first glance, the equation appears straightforward. The United States possesses overwhelming military superiority. If open conflict erupted, America could dominate the battlefield. But here is the tension. Dominating the battlefield is not the same as resolving the conflict. A war with Iran would not ultimately be measured by how many facilities are destroyed or how many air defenses are neutralized. It would be judged by what remains, politically, militarily, regionally, after the strikes are over. For Washington, that means securing 4 outcomes at the same time. First, permanently dismantle Iran's nuclear capability, not merely slow it down, not temporarily degrade it. Eliminate it in a way that prevents a rapid breakout months later. Second, guarantee that it cannot regenerate, even if centrifuges are dispersed, get uranium stockpiles relocated, or new facilities concealed deep underground. Third, contain regional escalation. Because a strike on Iran would not stay confined within its borders, it could activate Hezbollah in Lebanon, militias in Iraq, the Houthis in Yemen, and threaten the Strait of Hormuz, a choke point through which roughly 1/5 of the world's oil flows. Fourth, avoid long-term entanglement, no occupation, no regime collapse vacuum, no repetition of Iraq. And here is the strategic bind. No military pathway guarantees all 4 simultaneously. A limited air campaign might delay the nuclear timeline, but leave the core capability intact. A broader offensive might cripple infrastructure, but ignite a regional war. Regime change might remove leadership, but unleash instability beyond anyone's control. The United States has the capacity to destroy. What it does not possess is a reliable method to destroy and shape the aftermath at the same time. And in modern warfare, it is the aftermath that defines victory. If the United States prepares for wars of dominance, Iran prepares for wars of endurance. Tehran understands that it cannot defeat America in a conventional head-to-head confrontation. It cannot match U.S. air power, naval reach, or global logistics. So it has built its entire military doctrine around a different objective, not to win outright, but to make victory painfully expensive. This is asymmetric warfare by design. Instead of trying to mirror American capabilities, Iran invests in tools that complicate them. Rather than compete for air superiority, it builds layered missile systems. Rather than construct aircraft carriers, it develops swarms of drones. Rather than rely solely on its own armed forces, it cultivates networks of allied militias across the region. The goal is not battlefield dominance. The goal is escalation leverage. Missiles and drones sit at the center of this strategy. Iran is estimated to possess more than 3,000 ballistic and cruise missiles capable of striking U.S. bases and regional allies. Its widely used Shahed 136 drones cost roughly $20,000 to $40,000 each. Intercepting one with a U.S. Patriot missile can cost around $4 million. That imbalance matters. In prolonged conflict, the side that forces the other to spend disproportionately more to defend than to attack gains strategic advantage. But Iran's deterrence does not stop at its borders. Hezbollah in Lebanon is believed to hold around 150,000 rockets, enough to saturate defenses and widen any conflict with Israel. The Houthis in Yemen have already demonstrated the ability to threaten shipping lanes in the Red Sea. Iran-aligned militias in Iraq and Syria operate within range of roughly 2,500 U.S. troops stationed in the region, which means a war with Iran would not stay inside Iran. It would expand outward, horizontally, across multiple fronts. The United States prefers decisive battles. Iran prefers distributed pressure. And the more distributed the battlefield becomes, the harder it is for any superpower to control the consequences. If missiles raise the cost of war, the nuclear program raises the consequences of war. Because at the core of this entire confrontation is not simply military strength, but nuclear proximity, how close Iran stands to the threshold where deterrence shifts from theoretical to real. Iran is widely assessed to possess roughly 400 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% purity. Weapons-grade uranium requires about 90%. The critical point is that the climb from natural uranium to 60% is the hardest part. The jump from 60 to 90% is significantly shorter. If enough advanced centrifuges remain intact, experts estimate that further enrichment could take as little as 10 to 20 days. At that stage, the limiting factor is no longer engineering. It is political will. That is what defines a nuclear threshold state. Iran's facilities were designed with this reality in mind. The Fordo enrichment plant is buried approximately 80 to 90 meters beneath a mountain, hardened against conventional airstrikes. Only the United States possesses a bomb, the 30,000-pound GBU-57 bunker buster, believed capable of penetrating that depth. Even then, success would depend on precision targeting of structural weak points. Penetration does not automatically mean elimination, but the deeper problem is strategic. Even if enrichment halls are damaged, the program itself may not disappear. Enriched uranium can be relocated. Centrifuges can be dispersed. Covert facilities may exist beyond public knowledge. Technical expertise cannot be bombed away. This is the dilemma. Airstrikes can degrade infrastructure. They cannot guarantee erasure of capability. And once a state reaches the nuclear threshold, capability alone becomes deterrence. Not because a weapon has been declared, but because it could exist faster than anyone can comfortably tolerate. Over the past 2 decades, modern geopolitics has produced a pattern so stark that Iranian leaders have not merely observed it, they have absorbed it. In 2003, Libya's Muammar Gaddafi agreed to dismantle his nuclear weapons program. He opened his facilities to inspectors, shipped sensitive materials out of the country, and sought rapprochement with the West. For a moment, Libya was praised as a triumph of non-proliferation. Yet, in 2011, NATO intervened during Libya's uprising. The regime collapsed. Gaddafi was captured and killed. From Tehran's vantage point, the sequence is the lesson. Disarmament preceded vulnerability. Vulnerability preceded regime change. Then came Iraq. In 2003, the United States invaded Saddam Hussein over alleged weapons of mass destruction. No active nuclear arsenal was discovered. Iraq did not possess a bomb. The regime was nonetheless overthrown, and the country unraveled into prolonged instability. For Iranian strategists, this was not simply an intelligence controversy. It was proof that the absence of a credible deterrent leaves a regime exposed. Iraq had no ultimate shield, and it fell. In contrast stands North Korea. In 2003, Pyongyang withdrew from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. In 2006, it tested a nuclear weapon. Since then, despite sanctions, isolation, and relentless international pressure, North Korea has not been invaded. Its regime endures. 3 precedents, 3 outcomes. Libya relinquished its program and collapsed. Iraq had no bomb and collapsed. North Korea built nuclear weapons and survived. From Tehran's perspective, the conclusion is strategic, not ideological. Nuclear weapons are less instruments of aggression than guarantees of regime survival. Not tools for conquest, but insurance against conquest. And once that conviction crystallizes into doctrine, the room for compromise contracts sharply. If limited strikes risk escalation, regime change risks something even worse: collapse without control. The closest modern precedent is Iraq in 2003. At its peak, the United States deployed roughly 170,000 troops. The war ultimately cost an estimated $2 trillion. Around 4,500 American service members were killed, and hundreds of thousands of Iraqis died in the violence that followed. What began as a rapid military victory evolved into years of insurgency, sectarian conflict, and nation-building. Now scale that scenario to Iran. Iran is roughly 4 times larger than Iraq geographically. Its population is nearly 3 times larger. Its terrain includes mountains, deserts, and dense urban centers. Its security forces are deeply embedded within society through the Revolutionary Guard and affiliated militias. Any full-scale invasion would not resemble a short campaign. It would likely require a massive ground force, prolonged stabilization, and an open-ended commitment. The financial and human costs could easily exceed Iraq, potentially by a wide margin. And even if the regime were toppled, the risks would not end. They would multiply. Iran is ethnically and politically diverse, with Persians, Azeris, Kurds, Arabs, and Baluch communities spread across sensitive border regions. A sudden power vacuum could trigger internal fragmentation. Civil conflict could erupt. Militant groups could exploit instability. Regional powers might intervene to protect their interests. Military victory would not automatically produce political order. It could instead produce prolonged chaos in a country of nearly 90 million people at the heart of the Middle East. And that is the core dilemma. Regime change promises finality, but history suggests it often delivers instability. In the case of Iran, the aftermath could prove far more destabilizing than the regime it seeks to remove. Even if a war with Iran were militarily achievable, it would erupt at a moment when the United States is already balancing multiple high-risk theaters. Washington remains heavily invested in supporting Ukraine against Russia's invasion, channeling tens of billions of dollars in military and financial assistance while replenishing its own strained stockpiles. Simultaneously, it is attempting to deter China in the Indo-Pacific, particularly around Taiwan, where U.S. defense planners increasingly describe the coming decade as decisive. At the same time, America continues reinforcing NATO's eastern flank, expanding deployments in Europe, and reassuring allies confronting a more assertive Moscow. All of this unfolds against a fiscal backdrop of roughly $34 trillion in national debt. Annual defense spending approaches $900 billion. The capacity to absorb another large, open-ended war is not infinite, politically, financially, or militarily. A major confrontation with Iran would not be a brief air campaign measured in days. It could require sustained strike operations, force protection for tens of thousands of U.S. personnel across the region, naval deployments in the Persian Gulf, and readiness for regional escalation. It would consume precision munitions, carrier strike groups, intelligence assets, and strategic focus. And focus may be the scarcest resource of all. For more than a decade, U.S. grand strategy has centered on long-term competition with China. A prolonged Middle Eastern war would redirect assets and attention back toward a region Washington has repeatedly sought to deprioritize. This is the strategic trade-off. Every interceptor launched in the Gulf is one not reserved for the Pacific. Every carrier steaming toward the Strait of Hormuz is one not positioned in the South China Sea. A war with Iran would not occur in isolation. It would recalibrate America's global posture and potentially dilute its capacity to compete where it believes the future balance of power will be decided. Here is the paradox at the center of this standoff. The system is volatile, yet it endures. Iran does not need to defeat the United States. It does not need air superiority or decisive battlefield victories. It needs only 3 guarantees: that it is not invaded, that its regime is not removed, and that it preserves the ability to impose meaningful costs if attacked. As long as Tehran can threaten U.S. bases, disrupt global energy corridors, activate proxy networks, or edge closer to nuclear breakout capability, deterrence remains intact. In this framework, survival is success. Endurance is victory, but Washington is constrained as well. The United States does not seek a full-scale war with Iran. Its objectives are narrower: prevent nuclear weaponization, defend allies, and avoid another prolonged Middle Eastern conflict that drains resources and fractures strategic priorities. A major war could trigger oil shocks, ignite regional escalation, and divert attention from the Indo-Pacific. So, both sides maneuver within invisible guardrails. Iran cannot escalate too far without inviting overwhelming retaliation. The United States cannot escalate too far without risking a wider conflict it may not be able to contain. This is mutual deterrence without formal recognition, a balance sustained not by trust, but by shared fear of uncontrolled escalation. Each side holds enough power to inflict severe damage. Neither side holds confidence that it can manage the aftermath of total war. And that is why the confrontation persists in the gray zone. Sanctions, covert operations, cyber campaigns, proxy skirmishes, calibrated pressure that stops short of catastrophe. At its core, the dilemma is deceptively simple. The United States can dominate the battlefield. But battlefield dominance is not the same as securing a durable peace. Iran does not need to defeat America militarily. It only needs to avoid collapse. As long as it prevents occupation, blocks regime change, and preserves the capacity to impose painful costs through missiles, proxy forces, or nuclear escalation, it achieves its central objective: survival. A war would also be extraordinarily costly. Iran's vast territory and difficult terrain complicate invasion. Its missile and drone strategy raises the price of defense. Its regional proxy network could stretch the conflict across the Middle East. And any disruption of the Strait of Hormuz could send shockwaves through global energy markets overnight. Then there is the nuclear dimension. Iran stands near the weapons threshold. Under sustained pressure, it could accelerate. The risks of rapid escalation would rise immediately. And Washington remembers Iraq, the trillions spent, the political backlash, the years of entanglement. Another prolonged Middle Eastern occupation is not aligned with a strategy increasingly focused on competition with China. So the real question is not whether America has the power. It is whether any version of defeat would truly produce greater stability, or simply unleash a more dangerous phase of instability. If this breakdown helped clarify the stakes, subscribe and join us as we continue unpacking the forces shaping today's most volatile geopolitical flashpoints.